I lay on the stiff hospital bed, the smell of antiseptic thick in the air, the oxygen mask pressing against my face as though it carried the weight of my entire existence. My chest rose and fell with difficulty, every breath sounding louder in my ears than the beeping of the heart monitor beside me. Across the room, my mother sat in a chair, her legs crossed, scrolling through her phone as if the reality of her daughter struggling to breathe was nothing more than background noise. She didn't look up once, not even when I shifted in pain, not even when the nurse adjusted the IV line that tugged at my arm. Her indifference was more suffocating than the illness itself. I kept my eyes fixed on her, hoping for one flicker of concern, one trace of humanity, but it never came. It never had. It wasn't just that she wasn't comforting me. It was the way she looked right through me, as though I were invisible. All my life, I had fought for her gaze, for her approval, for her love, but each attempt ended in the same hollow silence. She reserved her tenderness for my brother Matteo, the golden child who seemed to shine effortlessly in her eyes. I could recall countless moments when he scraped his knee or failed a test, and she had been there with hugs, reassurance, and whispered words of encouragement. And yet, when I stood trembling with fevers, when I brought home achievements, when I cried myself to sleep, she remained cold and distant, as if my emotions were an inconvenience she refused to entertain. Watching her now, the distance between us felt immeasurable. The nurses spoke softly as they entered and exited the room, adjusting machines, checking vitals, but my mother never acknowledged them either. It was as if she wanted the world to believe she was present, when in truth, she was absent in every way that mattered. My father hadn't arrived yet. Ricardo was always late, always avoiding conflict, always hoping things would resolve themselves without him needing to intervene. He was not cruel like my mother, but his passivity had made him complicit in every wound she inflicted. And so, there I was, gasping for breath, fighting the weight on my chest, while the woman who had given me life treated my struggle like background static. I wanted to scream at her, but my voice had grown weak, and inside, I knew screaming would change nothing. Memories swirled in my mind, images of myself as a little girl clutching at Claudia's skirt, only to have her pull away with impatience. I remembered birthdays where she stood in the background, arms folded, watching Matteo blow out candles with a proud smile, while my own birthdays were nothing more than an obligation she endured. I remembered the sting of her words when I came home from school crying because the other kids had bullied me. "You're too sensitive. Toughen up." There was never warmth, never shelter, never safety in her presence. And as the machine beside me kept its rhythm, I realized this hospital room was simply another chapter in a book I had been forced to read all my life. Her silence was her weapon, sharper than any blade. I closed my eyes for a moment, and the thought crossed my mind like lightning. If I stopped breathing right now, would she even notice? Would she stand up from that chair? Would she let the phone slip from her hand in shock? Or would she keep scrolling, only glancing up when the doctors came rushing in? That thought terrified me more than the illness itself, that my existence, my survival, might mean nothing to her. And it wasn't a wild fear born of weakness. It was grounded in years of watching her care more about appearances, more about neighbors' opinions, more about Matteo's future than she ever did about me. That terror carved itself into my chest, pressing down harder than the illness. Her indifference hardened something inside me. I could feel it building quietly, like fire hidden beneath ashes. I was tired of being invisible, tired of begging for something that should have been freely given. Lying there, my lungs burning, I realized I was on the brink of something. I didn't know if it was survival or destruction, but I knew I would not leave this hospital the same way I had entered. I could no longer accept her silence as normal. I could no longer let myself be erased. Whether through words or through truth, I was going to make her see me, even if it was the last thing I ever did. A nurse leaned down to check the monitor, her eyes lingering on me with quiet compassion before flicking toward my mother with subtle disapproval. I saw it, even through my haze, the way outsiders recognized what she refused to. It should have comforted me, but instead it deepened the wound, because it meant the cruelty wasn't just in my head. It wasn't something I had exaggerated. It was real, so real others could see it with a single glance. That realization gave me strength, a dangerous kind of strength. If the truth was visible, then eventually it could no longer be denied, and I would be the one to speak it. I turned my gaze back to her, and though my voice was weak, inside my heart was loud. A storm brewed in my chest, one that had been gathering for years. one that could no longer be contained. She thought I was fragile, thought my illness had broken me, but she didn't see the fire she had lit by ignoring me. Each breath I took became less about surviving and more about preparing for the moment I would finally speak. She didn't know it yet, but this silence between us would not last. I was going to shatter it, and when I did, she would regret every moment she had looked away. The night grew heavy in the hospital, with the hum of machines filling the silence that my mother refused to break. I could hear the faint sound of footsteps in the hall, the muted conversations of nurses carrying trays and checking on other patients. Yet in my room, the only voice missing was hers. She scrolled her phone, her face lit by the cold glow of the screen, and I wondered if she was chatting with friends or reading pointless news while her daughter fought for air only a few feet away. I wanted to call her name, to ask her to look at me, but the thought of her indifferent glance terrified me more than silence itself. What if she did look up, and then looked away again? That rejection, I knew, would shatter me. Every inch of my body ached from the effort of simply existing. I could feel the weakness in my muscles, the heaviness in my lungs, the pressure that made breathing a battle I wasn't sure I could win. Yet my pain was not what broke me. It was the knowledge that she didn't see it, didn't care enough to acknowledge it. In that moment, I was convinced she wished I were Mateo instead. He had always been her masterpiece. Perfect grades, endless charm, the kind of son who made parents proud. I had been the shadow, the mistake she barely tolerated. I replayed her voice in my head from years before. Why can't you be more like your brother? Those words had carved scars deeper than any illness ever could. When my father finally entered the room, his tie loosened and his face flushed with exhaustion, he tried to bring warmth with him. "How is she?" he asked softly, brushing his hand across my forehead. For a brief moment, I felt seen, felt acknowledged, but Claudia's dismissive reply cut through the air. The same. She exaggerates everything. My chest tightened, as though her words pressed down harder than the illness itself. To her, my pain was a performance, my suffering an inconvenience. And worse, my father didn't challenge her. He sighed, nodded, and sat quietly, as if peace in their marriage was worth more than truth in this room. I wanted to scream, stop pretending, stop letting her erase me. The weight of unspoken words grew inside me, threatening to burst. I wanted to tell my father that I was drowning, that his silence was as heavy as her cruelty. I wanted to tell my mother that her neglect was killing me faster than the disease, but the words tangled in my throat, choked by years of conditioning that told me I wasn't worth listening to. My entire life, my voice had been muted by her dismissive tone, her disapproving glances, her sharp sighs of impatience. Now, even in a room where my survival hung by a thread, I couldn't break free. My silence protected me from more rejection, but it also chained me to the very pain I longed to escape. The doctors entered later, adjusting machines, discussing my test results with words that blurred together in my mind. "We'll know more tomorrow," one of them said, offering me a gentle smile before leaving. Tomorrow. Always tomorrow. As if my life was a waiting game, as if time could be stretched endlessly while I suffocated in the present. I saw the way my mother's eyes glazed over, uninterested, impatient. She wanted this ordeal to be over, not because she feared for me, but because it disrupted her world, her schedule, her control. And in that moment, I realized I was not her daughter. I was her burden. That truth was colder than any diagnosis could ever be. A spark of defiance lit in my chest as I thought, no more. I could no longer let her rewrite my story with silence and indifference. I didn't know how or when, but I promised myself that I would speak, that I would say the words I had carried in my heart for years. She thought I was weak, but the truth was that every breath I fought for made me stronger, and when the moment came, I would release all of it. The pain, the truth, the anger she had tried so hard to bury. My voice would no longer be silent. Even if it broke her, even if it shattered everything in this family, I was going to make her hear me. That night, as the hospital lights dimmed and shadows lengthened across the sterile floor, I whispered into the darkness, "You'll regret ignoring me." My voice was faint, barely audible even to myself, but the words carried weight I could feel in my bones. They were a promise, a prophecy, a vow. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or if I would even have the strength to face it, but I knew this. The story would no longer be hers to control. It would be mine. And when the truth finally came, it would shake this family in ways none of them expected. I drifted into sleep with those words echoing in my mind. a fragile thread of power in a life that had been filled with powerlessness. For the first time in years, I felt the tiniest flicker of control, the spark of something waiting to ignite. And though I did not yet know how, I sensed that destiny was preparing me for a revelation that would not only change me, but would leave everyone in that room stunned, exposed, and forever unable to look at me the same way again. The next morning, sunlight forced its way through the blinds of the hospital window, spilling golden rays onto the sterile floor, but the warmth it carried didn't reach me. My mother sat by the window, sipping coffee from a paper cup, her face distant, as if she were anywhere but here. She didn't look at me. She didn't ask if I had slept, or if the pain had been manageable. To her, my struggle was background noise, something she tolerated until she could escape. Watching her, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, present but unseen, breathing yet invisible. Every rustle of her cup was a reminder that her attention belonged elsewhere. Memories flooded me, uninvited and sharp. I remembered being 6 years old, standing on stage at my school's recital, searching for her face in the audience. She was there, but her eyes weren't on me. They were on Mateo, who sat beside her, fidgeting with his toy car. When I finished my performance, timidly smiling, hoping for her applause, she was clapping only half-heartedly, her gaze still fixed on him. That moment had carved something deep inside me, a wound that never healed. It wasn't just neglect, it was preference, and preference stings more than outright hatred, because it means you exist, but only as second best. Mateo visited later that day, strolling into the room with his usual confidence, carrying flowers and chocolates like a hero returning from battle. My mother's eyes lit up instantly, her smile blooming in a way I had never seen directed at me. "Mateo!" she exclaimed, her voice suddenly alive, as if the air shifted with his presence. He hugged her tightly before glancing at me with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "How's my little sister?" he asked, and though the words were kind, they felt rehearsed, as if he had learned them from a script about how brothers should act. I forced a weak smile, but inside, I screamed, "Don't pretend. You don't care either." He stayed only a few minutes, chatting mostly with Claudia, their voices weaving together in a rhythm that excluded me entirely. They laughed about trivial things, his promotion at work, her latest social gathering, while I lay there, tethered to machines, gasping for air. I felt like an intruder in my own hospital room, as though they were the honored guests, and I was merely taking up space. When Mateo finally left, he pressed a kiss to my forehead, but his eyes darted toward his phone as if already moving on. The emptiness he left behind was louder than his presence. My mother sighed contentedly, as though his visit had filled her with pride that I could never inspire. Anger built inside me, sharp and hot, but it was the kind of anger that had no release. I couldn't shout, couldn't throw anything, couldn't storm out. My body betrayed me, chaining me to the bed, while my emotions ricocheted inside like bullets with nowhere to land. I wanted to confront them both, to demand why my pain wasn't enough, why my love never measured up. But fear held me hostage, fear of being dismissed again, fear of hearing, once more, that terrible question, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" The truth was, I had spent years trying, but no matter what I achieved, it never filled the void of her approval. That afternoon, a nurse named Elena stopped by to check on me. She had kind eyes and a voice that carried warmth like sunlight. Unlike my mother, she asked how I was feeling and waited for my answer, truly listening. "You're stronger than you think," she said softly, adjusting my IV line. Her words nearly broke me, because they felt like the first kindness I'd been offered in days. For a fleeting second, I imagined what it would be like if she were my mother instead, someone who saw me, who cared about my comfort, who noticed the small battles I fought each hour. The contrast made Claudia's silence cut deeper. As evening fell, my father returned, worn from work, but still carrying a softness in his expression that gave me a flicker of hope. He sat by my bed, gently holding my hand, whispering, "You're my brave girl." I wanted to believe him, but his presence always came shadowed by Claudia's dismissive glare. She never said it aloud, but her eyes accused him of coddling me, of wasting his tenderness on someone unworthy. His love was a candle flickering against the storm of her indifference, and I feared it would eventually burn out. Yet I clung to it desperately, because it was the only proof that I wasn't entirely unwanted. That night, as I stared at the ceiling, I wondered if I had been born to be invisible. Maybe that was my role in this family, the shadow that made Mateo's light shine brighter, the one who absorbed the rejection so he could bask in endless approval. But another part of me, a quieter, more dangerous part, whispered that my life was worth more than this, that my pain and my truth deserved to be heard. And if I ever gathered the strength to speak, the words would not just demand attention, they would unravel everything. My mother had built her world on the foundation of ignoring me, but what would happen when silence was no longer an option? For the first time, I imagined the possibility of confrontation not as a dream, but as an inevitability. The tension in our family wasn't sustainable, and the truth had a way of rising, no matter how deeply it was buried. As sleep pulled me under, I realized something with startling clarity. One day, she would hear me, and when she did, it wouldn't just be my voice breaking the silence. It would be the sound of her carefully crafted world collapsing around her. The day began with a storm outside, thunder rattling the hospital windows as if echoing the turmoil inside me. I had barely slept, my mind replaying every word, every glance of indifference from my mother. The sound of rain drumming against the glass felt almost comforting, a reminder that nature itself knew how to release its anger, while mine stayed bottled inside. Claudia arrived mid-morning, her heels clicking against the floor, her perfume filling the room before her voice did. "You look better," she said flatly, though she never made eye contact. It was the kind of comment that sounded like politeness, but tasted like poison. I forced a nod, knowing better than to hope for more. The nurses noticed, of course. Elena gave me a sympathetic look after my mother left to answer a phone call, mouthing silently, "She doesn't see you, does she?" I wanted to cry at the truth in her observation, but I swallowed it down. Crying in front of Claudia had always been dangerous. It only fed her disdain. Growing up, tears were considered weakness, and weakness was ammunition she never hesitated to use. I had learned early that silence was safer, even if it suffocated me. But lately, silence felt like a betrayal. To myself, to the pain that demanded recognition, to the years I had been overlooked. Later that afternoon, Mateo returned, carrying a box of pastries, as if he were some benevolent savior. "I thought everyone might like a treat," he announced cheerfully, placing them on the side table. Claudia beamed, thanking him as though he had just donated an organ. She urged me to try one, her tone filled with performative kindness, but I couldn't stomach it. The sweetness turned bitter in my mouth before I even tasted it. I watched them laugh together, and it struck me how easily they performed the perfect family act, while I sat only inches away, unraveling inside, invisible in the same room. At one point, Mateo leaned in and whispered something that made Claudia laugh so hard she had to wipe her eyes. I stared, heat rising in my chest, feeling like an intruder in their shared universe. "What's so funny?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my attempt to sound casual. The room grew still for a second too long. Claudia finally answered, "Nothing important, Isabella. Don't worry about it." The dismissal cut deeper than any insult could. It wasn't just exclusion. It was deliberate erasure. And in that moment, I realized that the laughter wasn't harmless. It was a language meant to remind me that I didn't belong. That evening, my father came again, weary from work, but carrying the quiet strength that always made me feel less alone. He sat close, his hand covering mine, whispering that I mattered, that I was his heartbeat. I wanted to believe him, but the bitterness inside me twisted even his love into something fragile. Could a single candle really keep the darkness at bay when the storm was this relentless? I searched his face for certainty, but even he looked tired. Tired of the fights, tired of Claudia's coldness, tired of the imbalance that ruled our family. And I hated that I might be the reason for his exhaustion. As night fell, the storm outside grew fiercer, lightning flashing against the hospital walls. Lying in bed, I realized how much storms resembled our family. Thunderous, destructive, unpredictable, leaving silence only in their wake. I thought back to all the times I had been left behind, forgotten at school pickups, birthdays where my cake was an afterthought compared to Mateo's grand parties, moments when I begged for her attention only to be met with excuses. The hospital wasn't the beginning of this pain. It was just another stage for the same performance. And the audience had grown too comfortable in their roles. But that night, something shifted inside me. As the machines beside me hummed, I whispered words I had never dared to say aloud. "I deserve more." The sentence hung in the air, fragile yet powerful, like a spark, waiting to ignite. My chest ached not just from illness, but from years of swallowing my truth. I wasn't sure when, but I knew the moment was coming when I would no longer stay silent. Silence had protected me once, but now it was killing me faster than the sickness in my lungs. As I closed my eyes, one thought refused to leave me. Claudia believed she had me figured out, that I would always stay the quiet shadow, too weak to confront her. But storms don't stay silent forever, and when mine finally broke, it wouldn't just be a whisper. It would be the thunder that shattered her illusion of control. The morning began deceptively calm. The scent of disinfectant filled the air as the nurses changed shifts, and I tried to distract myself by watching the clock's hands crawl across the wall. Claudia walked in dressed immaculately as always, her lipstick a shade too bold for a hospital room, her presence like a performance meant for an audience that wasn't there. She greeted Matteo with a warmth she never spared for me, then settled by the window, scrolling through her phone. I noticed her nails tapping against the glass, impatient, as though being in my room was a punishment she endured only out of obligation. For a moment, I wished she would leave entirely, just vanish, because her silence weighed heavier than words. Matteo sat by my bed, fiddling with one of the pastries he'd brought the day before. "You really should eat something," he murmured, his tone carrying that subtle superiority that had always been his weapon. When I didn't respond, he smirked. "Or maybe you like being sick because it gives you attention." His words pierced like glass. Before I could answer, Claudia looked up and laughed. Not a loud laugh, but the kind that said she agreed. It was confirmation that in their private alliance, I was the joke. My chest tightened, not just from the illness, but from the suffocating realization that my pain was entertainment for them. I couldn't stop myself. The words erupted before I even thought them through. "Do you even hear yourselves? I'm lying here fighting to breathe, and all you can do is mock me." My voice shook, not with weakness, but with rage. Claudia's eyes narrowed, her mask slipping for a brief second. "Don't start drama, Isabella," she snapped, her tone sharp as a blade. "No one's mocking you. You're imagining things again, like you always do." Her dismissal felt like gasoline poured on fire. My chest heaved, and for once I didn't shrink back into silence. For once, I wanted her to feel even a fraction of the weight she had buried me under. The argument grew louder, pulling in unwanted witnesses. Elena, the nurse, entered mid-sentence and froze, her eyes darting between Claudia's icy stare and my trembling body. "Is everything okay here?" she asked cautiously. Claudia straightened instantly, switching back into her practiced role. "Of course. My daughter just gets emotional sometimes." The word emotional hung in the air like an insult, stripping me of credibility before I could even defend myself. Elena's expression softened toward me, and I saw in her eyes that she recognized the manipulation. That silent acknowledgement was both comforting and terrifying. It meant the truth was visible now, even if no one dared name it. Later that day, the doctor came in to check on my progress. As he adjusted my IV, Claudia hovered at his side, asking pointed questions as though she were the only one who mattered. "She'll be fine, right? Nothing too serious?" "She tends to exaggerate," Claudia said casually. My blood went cold. The doctor glanced at me, clearly unsettled. "Her condition is serious, Mrs. Rivera. She needs rest, care, and above all, less stress." His words felt like an arrow shot through the carefully constructed facade. Claudia's lips tightened, but she said nothing. For once, her authority was publicly questioned, and it left a visible crack in her performance. After the doctor left, the silence was heavy. Claudia sat stiffly, her eyes refusing to meet mine, her fingers gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles whitened. Matteo cleared his throat, but even he didn't dare break the silence. I felt a strange sense of victory, small but sharp, like sunlight piercing through storm clouds. Someone else had seen it. Someone with authority had contradicted her. And for the first time, I realized she wasn't untouchable. The fortress she had built around herself wasn't made of stone. It was made of glass, and glass, no matter how polished, always shatters when struck hard enough. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the moment over and over. Claudia's expression when the doctor corrected her wasn't anger. It was fear of being exposed, of losing control, of having her carefully crafted narrative slip from her grasp. I understood then that her cruelty wasn't just power. It was desperation, a constant fight to maintain a version of herself that reality threatened to undo. But understanding her didn't erase the damage she had done to me. If anything, It made me realize how long I had been the collateral damage in her war against her own insecurities. Still, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with questions. Why had she chosen me as her scapegoat? What had I done to deserve her disdain? Was it because I looked too much like my father? Because I reminded her of choices she regretted? Or was I simply easier to crush than Mateo, the golden son who carried her pride like a crown? Whatever the answer, I knew this. The next time she tried to silence me, I wouldn't hold back. The storm inside me had already begun, and once it broke, it would not be contained. The morning sun filtered weakly through the blinds, painting lines of gold across the sterile hospital floor. I was half awake when I heard the sharp rhythm of Claudia's heels clicking toward my door, each step like a warning bell. She entered briskly, holding a bouquet of flowers so exaggeratedly large it seemed meant to impress, rather than comfort. 2 nurses followed behind, wheeling equipment, and I noticed Claudia's smile stretch unnaturally wide as she greeted them. "Thank you so much for taking care of my daughter," she purred, her tone dripping with artificial sweetness. But the moment their eyes shifted away, her smile vanished like a mask dropped backstage. That duality, kindness in public, cruelty in private, was a performance I had endured all my life. Mateo joined shortly after, carrying a coffee cup in one hand, his phone in the other, barely glancing in my direction, before launching into small talk with Claudia. "Did you hear about Diego's promotion?" he asked her, as though my presence was irrelevant. She nodded enthusiastically, eyes shining as though Mateo's achievements were hers as well. I felt invisible, a ghost in my own hospital room. The nurses, however, noticed. One of them, Elena again, glanced at me with concern. She saw me shrinking into myself, and I knew she sensed the imbalance. The pity in her gaze was both unbearable and affirming. Someone else could see the truth, even if no one dared name it aloud. The charade began to unravel when a social worker stopped by unexpectedly. Her name was Marisol, and she was tasked with assessing my well-being after the severity of my admission. Claudia straightened immediately, sitting taller, speaking with a tone of motherly authority that made me want to scream. "Isabella is sensitive, always has been," she explained smoothly, waving a dismissive hand. "She dramatizes things, but of course we love her dearly." Her voice was sugar, but her eyes were daggers stabbing into me. Marisol, however, didn't let it slide. She asked me directly, "And how do you feel, Isabella? Do you think your needs are being heard?" My throat tightened. It was the first time someone in power had addressed me instead of her. I hesitated, the silence stretching painfully, and Claudia's eyes bored into me, warning me not to speak, but something inside me broke free. "No," I whispered, then louder. "No, I don't feel heard. I don't feel safe either." Claudia's head snapped toward me, her face pale with shock. The room fell silent, the air heavy as lead. For once the roles had reversed. I had spoken the truth out loud, and she had no immediate script prepared. Marisol's eyebrows lifted slightly, and she began writing notes. The sound of pen on paper was like thunder in Claudia's carefully crafted world, each stroke spelling out the beginning of her unraveling. After Marisol left, Claudia's fury erupted like a storm. The moment the door shut, her voice rose in a venomous hiss. "How dare you embarrass me like that? Do you have any idea what people will think now?" Her words sliced through the air, louder with each syllable, until even Mateo looked unsettled. "Mom, maybe you should calm down," he muttered, though his loyalty wavered. For the first time, he seemed to recognize the cruelty in her tone. I stared at her, my heart pounding, and realized that her fear wasn't for me, it was for herself. Her anger came from the possibility of exposure, of losing control, and that thought gave me strength. The argument reached its peak when Elena returned to adjust my IV. She walked in, just as Claudia's voice echoed, "You'll ruin this family if you keep running your mouth." Elena froze, her eyes widening. Claudia turned instantly, her tone shifting back to sweetness, but it was too late. Elena had heard enough. She said nothing, but her expression said everything. She lingered by my side a moment longer than necessary, her hand resting gently on my arm in silent solidarity. That small gesture gave me courage. For the first time in years, I felt I wasn't fighting alone. Someone was watching, someone was listening, and Claudia knew it too. Later that evening, when visiting hours ended, Claudia left abruptly, muttering under her breath, her composure shattered. Mateo lingered, clearly uncomfortable. "Isabella, maybe you should have kept quiet," he said uncertainly, his tone more conflicted than before. I looked him straight in the eye and replied, Silence is what's been killing me. If you can't see that, then you're part of the problem." He flinched as though I'd struck him. His phone buzzed, and he left without another word, the door closing behind him, with a finality that left me both terrified and relieved. The walls of the fortress had trembled today, and though the battle wasn't over, I knew I had made the first crack. That night, lying awake in the dim glow of the monitors, I replayed every word, every look, every shift in power. Claudia wasn't invincible anymore. For years she had convinced everyone, my brother, our relatives, even me, that I was the fragile one, the liar, the problem. But today, in front of witnesses, the truth had slipped through her fingers. She had been seen for what she really was, even if only in glimpses. I clutched onto that thought like a lifeline. The war was far from won, but for the first time, I felt hope. And hope, once lit, is not so easily extinguished. The following afternoon, the room filled with an unusual buzz as relatives began to arrive. Word of my hospitalization had spread, and cousins, aunts, even my grandmother trickled in with polite concern. Claudia orchestrated the gathering like a stage play, welcoming each person with hugs and exaggerated sighs, painting herself as the devoted mother holding everything together. "It's been so hard on me," she murmured dramatically, placing a hand over her chest, as though she were the one attached to monitors and IVs. I watched silently, bitterness burning in my veins. This was her stage, her audience, and she was performing flawlessly. Grandmother Rosa, small and frail but sharp-eyed, settled in the chair beside my bed. She clasped my hand gently, whispering, "Mi niña, you look so tired." Her voice carried warmth that Claudia's never did, and I felt tears sting my eyes. But Claudia interrupted quickly, shifting the spotlight. "She exaggerates her condition, Mama," Claudia said with a tight smile. "The doctors say she just needs rest. She worries too much." Rosa frowned, clearly unconvinced, and squeezed my hand tighter. I caught the subtle shift in the room. Doubt was beginning to flicker in the eyes of those who once trusted Claudia blindly. As the conversation swirled, Matteo arrived again, his voice louder than necessary as he bragged about his recent business deal. Claudia praised him openly, her pride evident in every word, while my presence was treated like background scenery. "He's always been my rock," she announced, smiling as relatives nodded approvingly. I felt invisible, like a shadow in my own life story. But then Rosa's voice cut through the noise. "And what about Isabella? She's here, sick, yet all I hear is Matteo this, Matteo that." The room fell silent, every eye turning toward me. Claudia's smile faltered, just for a second. I wanted to sink into the bed, but instead, something inside me urged me forward. "Abuela, I've been struggling for months," I said, my voice trembling yet steady. "But when I ask for help, I'm told I'm weak. When I speak, I'm told I'm dramatic. And when I hurt, I'm told it doesn't matter." The silence deepened, tension thick in the air. Claudia's face stiffened, but she forced a laugh. "Don't listen to her. She's confused from the medication." Her words were light, but her eyes were hard, desperate. I realized then, she was losing control of the story she had crafted so carefully. Rosa didn't back down. "Confused," she repeated sharply. "No, Claudia." I hear clarity in her words. Pain, yes, but not confusion. "You've been too quick to dismiss her." The room stirred with murmurs, relatives exchanging uncertain glances. Matteo shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. Claudia's mask cracked further. Her lips tightened, her voice a little sharper as she insisted she was only protecting me. But her performance rang hollow now, the audience less convinced than before. For the first time in years, I wasn't the only one seeing her true colors. The tipping point came when Rosa, her frail hand still clutching mine, turned to Claudia directly. "A mother protects, yes, but a mother also listens. Have you listened, Claudia? Or only spoken for yourself?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Claudia's eyes blazed with fury, but she couldn't lash out, not with so many witnesses. She stammered something about sacrifice and responsibility, but the conviction was gone. The room no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the truth that had finally slipped free from the cracks in her armor. I felt my pulse race, but instead of fear, it was something else. Relief, power, even a hint of justice. For years, Claudia had silenced me, convinced me that my voice had no weight. Yet here I was, speaking, and people were listening. My truth, once buried under her lies, was finally being heard. I realized then that survival wasn't just about enduring her cruelty. It was about reclaiming my story, piece by piece. And though the road ahead still terrified me, tonight I saw what was possible. Claudia was not untouchable. As the relatives began to leave, their expressions told me everything. Doubt, suspicion, even quiet disapproval lingered in their eyes as they looked at Claudia. She tried to smile, but her hands trembled slightly, her laughter hollow. Rosa kissed my forehead gently before leaving, whispering, "Don't stop speaking, mi niña. The truth is your weapon now." Her words sank deep into me, planting a seed of courage. I lay back against the pillows, exhausted but lighter. For the first time in years, Claudia was no longer the sole narrator of my life, and that realization changed everything. The following morning, the room felt heavier, as if the air itself carried Claudia's tension. She hovered near the window, scrolling through her phone, ignoring me until a nurse entered to check my vitals. As the nurse adjusted my IV, Claudia's voice snapped across the room. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" The nurse, startled, reassured her gently, but I saw the flush of irritation in her cheeks. "I have to protect my daughter," Claudia added loudly, casting a quick glance at me, but her tone wasn't protective. It was accusatory, as if my very existence was a problem she was forced to manage. I felt shame curl in my stomach as Claudia continued her tirade. "She exaggerates everything, even pain," she said, gesturing toward me as though I weren't in the room. "You'll see she's not as fragile as she pretends." The nurse's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes flicking between us. "Ms. Claudia," she said firmly, "your daughter is stable, but she is not exaggerating. Her condition is serious." Claudia's jaw clenched, her eyes flashing. "You don't know her like I do," she hissed. That was when I saw the nurse's patience evaporate. The balance of power was shifting, and Claudia could feel it. Later, when the doctor entered for his rounds, Claudia was quick to intercept him. "Doctor, surely you see this isn't as bad as she claims. She always dramatizes." Her voice was honeyed, but strained, each word dripping with desperation. The doctor frowned and reviewed the monitor beside my bed. "Mrs. Claudia," he said slowly, "your daughter's oxygen levels are concerning. She needs calm, not dismissal. Emotional stress worsens her condition." His words landed like a stone in water, rippling through the silence. Claudia's face froze, then cracked into a brittle smile, but her hands fidgeted uncontrollably. The staff began to notice. Every time a nurse entered, Claudia tried to direct them, contradict them, or undermine their authority. Whispers passed in the hallway. I caught fragments. Controlling, toxic, not helping. For once, I wasn't the one being doubted. She was. Watching Claudia stumble against people who couldn't be manipulated so easily was like witnessing a storm begin to devour itself. I should have felt guilt, but instead I felt a strange calm. Perhaps justice doesn't arrive all at once. Perhaps it arrives in small cracks that eventually shatter the facade. That afternoon, another wave of relatives arrived, and Claudia tried to reclaim her role as the martyr. She wept loudly, telling them how difficult it had been to care for me, how she had sacrificed her happiness for my ungrateful existence. But this time, the performance rang false. The relatives exchanged skeptical looks, their eyes drawn not to her tears, but to my weary, fragile body in the bed. Rosa's words from the night before had planted seeds, and now I saw them sprouting. Claudia's voice grew shrill as she sensed their doubt, and her mask began to slip further. The breaking point came when the doctor returned with new results. He spoke bluntly, ignoring Claudia's interruptions. "Isabella requires more intensive monitoring. Stress and neglect have worsened her recovery." The word neglect echoed like thunder in the room. My relatives gasped softly, eyes snapping toward Claudia. Her face drained of color, then flushed crimson. "Neglect? How dare you?" she spat. "I've done everything for her. She is the ungrateful one, not me." Her voice cracked, too loud, too defensive. The room felt electric, every eye now seeing the crack she had fought to hide. I couldn't stop myself. I sat up slightly, trembling but determined. "Neglect is the right word," I said, my voice cutting through her rage. "You didn't just ignore me, Mama. You silenced me, mocked me, and left me to fight alone. You ripped away my oxygen mask when I needed it most. That wasn't love. It was cruelty." The words hung heavy, undeniable. Claudia's lips parted, but nothing came out. Her mask, the one she'd worn for decades, was splintering into pieces right there in front of everyone. The relatives looked at her with a mix of shock and pity. No longer blinded, Claudia staggered back, her hands shaking, her face contorted in disbelief. For the first time, she had no words to twist, no lies to shield her. I had pierced the armor she built with my silence. The room buzzed with whispers, the staff exchanging firm looks, ready to intervene if needed. I leaned back against the pillows, exhausted but lighter, a strange peace filling my chest. For the first time in my life, the truth wasn't locked inside me. It was alive, undeniable, echoing in every corner of that room. And Claudia, the woman who had silenced me for so long, could no longer escape it. The silence after my words was thick, broken only by the faint beep of the monitor beside me. Claudia's face had frozen in that grotesque half-smile, half-grimace, as though the muscles themselves couldn't decide what mask to hold anymore. She opened her mouth to speak, but her voice cracked before it could take shape. The relatives who had once rushed to comfort her now sat stiff in their chairs, their eyes shifting between us with dawning comprehension. For the first time, I wasn't the one on trial. Claudia was, and she could feel it pressing down on her like a weight she had never carried before. I almost pitied her. Almost. But the memory of her tearing my oxygen mask away burned hot in my mind, reminding me that pity was a luxury I could no longer afford. The doctor stepped closer, his eyes scanning both me and Claudia, as though measuring the tension in the room. His tone was steady, almost unnervingly calm, when he finally spoke. "I need everyone to understand something very clearly," he began, adjusting the chart in his hands. "Isabella's condition has been worsened not only by medical complications, but by her environment." A wave of murmurs rippled through the relatives. Claudia gasped sharply, her eyes widening as if the words had struck her physically. "Are you suggesting I am the cause of her suffering?" she demanded, her voice brittle with indignation. The doctor didn't flinch. "I am not suggesting," he said. "I am stating a fact." Claudia's composure broke further, her voice rising to a desperate pitch. "This is outrageous. I've been here every day, caring for her, sacrificing my own health." She clutched her chest as though to demonstrate the toll it had taken on her. But her theatrics rang hollow now, echoes of a performance that no longer captivated its audience. Rosa, arms crossed tightly over her chest, spoke up from the corner. "Caring for her? You nearly killed her. We saw you rip her mask away." The relatives gasped again, and Claudia's head whipped around, her eyes wide with panic. Her hand trembled as she pointed at Rosa. "Lies. She's lying to turn you against me." But even her accusations lacked conviction. I felt my chest tighten with both fear and relief, because the truth was being dragged out into the open whether I was ready or not. "It's not a lie," I said firmly, my voice trembling but resolute. She tore the mask from my face while I struggled to breathe, and that wasn't the first time she tried to silence me. It was only the most dangerous. A shiver went through the room. The doctor set the chart aside, folding his arms with the authority of someone who could no longer stay silent. "I have seen patterns like this before," he said. "Emotional neglect, manipulation, even physical interference with care. It is dangerous, and it is unacceptable." His words carried the weight of judgment, and suddenly, Claudia wasn't a mother defending her child. She was the accused. The silence was suffocating, until Claudia's voice split it open like a scream. "You don't know me!" she shrieked, her hands balling into fists. "You don't know what I've sacrificed. I raised her alone when her father left. I worked until my body broke, and what thanks do I get? Accusations, betrayal, humiliation in front of my family." Her words were fast, frantic, unraveling into something incoherent. For a moment she almost convinced me, her narrative of sacrifice, of survival against hardship. But then I remembered the nights she left me crying alone, the days she mocked my pain, the sharp sting of her voice reminding me I was a burden. Sacrifice doesn't excuse cruelty. Love isn't love if it destroys you in the process. The doctor spoke again, his voice low but heavy with finality. "Claudia, this is not about you. This is about your daughter's life. And the truth is, she has survived in spite of you, not because of you." The words struck like a gavel in a courtroom. Claudia recoiled as if slapped, her mouth opening but no words forming. The relatives sat frozen, their faces pale, each of them processing the reality they had ignored for years. Some looked at me with sorrow, others with guilt, but no one looked at Claudia with the admiration she had once commanded. For the first time, her audience had turned away. I could see the cracks spreading wider, her whole being trembling as she tried to maintain the persona she had built for decades. "No," she whispered, shaking her head violently. "No, you're wrong. She's manipulating you, all of you. She's always been dramatic, always seeking attention." Her voice cracked, her words tumbling into hysteria. "She's the reason her father left. She ruined everything." The confession slipped out before she could stop herself, her eyes widening at her own betrayal. Gasps filled the room, and my heart dropped. She had said the words I had always feared, but never heard aloud. I was the scapegoat. In her eyes, I had always been the curse. The weight of her admission pressed on me, but instead of breaking, I felt something else rise within me. Freedom. The truth was no longer hidden in shadows. It stood in the open, undeniable. I looked at her, really looked, and saw not the all-powerful figure who had haunted my life, but a woman collapsing under the weight of her own lies. "I didn't ruin anything," I whispered, tears burning my eyes. "You did. By choosing control over love, pride over compassion, you lost him. And you nearly lost me too." My voice cracked, but the strength in it was unshakable. Claudia's knees buckled, and she sank into the nearest chair, her face pale and trembling. She was no longer the mother towering above me with accusations. She was a broken figure, unraveling in front of everyone she had once controlled. The relatives murmured, shifting uneasily, the reality too raw to ignore. The doctor exhaled heavily, his eyes lingering on me with both sorrow and respect. "The truth has power," he said quietly, "and now it has been spoken." His words hung in the sterile air, final and undeniable. I leaned back, exhausted, but strangely unburdened. For the first time in my life, the chains of silence had been broken, and they would never hold me again. The morning sunlight poured into the room, stark and unforgiving, illuminating every line on Claudia's face. She sat slumped in the chair near my bed, her carefully constructed mask shattered completely, the pieces lying around her like shattered glass. Her hands shook, the tremor small but visible, and for the first time, she looked truly fragile, not in power, but in guilt and fear. My relatives lingered in the room, their expressions a mixture of shock, pity, and disbelief. Even Matteo, usually so confident and self-assured, had gone pale, glancing down at his hands as if he could erase the past with the mere act of hiding them. I felt the weight of years lift slightly from my chest, knowing that the truth I had carried in silence was finally recognized. The doctor returned, his face grave but composed, placing his clipboard on the bedside table. "I've reviewed all her records again," he said, his eyes meeting mine briefly, before settling on Claudia. "And I need everyone to understand the severity of what occurred. Her oxygen mask was removed at a critical time. That could have resulted in permanent damage. You were playing with her life." The words hung like a guillotine suspended over the room. Claudia's lips parted, her breath quickening as if she were struggling to find defenses that no longer existed. The room remained silent, each person processing the magnitude of her actions, realizing the danger she had caused. Claudia finally spoke, but her voice was weak, almost pleading. I didn't mean to. It wasn't like that." Her sentences faltered and crumbled into a torrent of excuses that even she didn't believe. "I was just stressed. I thought she was exaggerating. I didn't think it would." Her voice broke, and for the first time in decades, she couldn't hold herself upright with arrogance or authority. The relatives shifted uneasily, and some, like my Aunt Louisa, looked directly at her with an intensity that made Claudia flinch. There was no applause, no validation, only the quiet judgment of people who finally saw her as she was, a person consumed by her need for control. I felt a strange mix of pity and triumph as I sat upright, my voice steady. "It's over now," I said softly, almost to myself, but loud enough for her to hear. "You don't get to control me anymore. You don't get to dictate what's true or what's false. You can't erase the years of fear, the nights I cried alone, the moments you told me I didn't matter. You lost that power the moment the truth came into the open." My hands trembled slightly, but my gaze didn't waver. Claudia's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't only sorrow. They were the acknowledgement of defeat, a woman realizing she had lost the war she had fought so desperately to win. The relatives murmured, and one by one they began to speak, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. "We should have listened sooner," Rosa said, her voice gentle but firm. "We were blind to what was happening. I see it now, and I am sorry, Isabella." Mateo, awkward and guilty, muttered something about not realizing how bad it had been, his eyes dropping to the floor. Claudia's face twisted in a silent scream, unable to defend herself against the collective realization that her cruelty had been witnessed and condemned. I felt my chest expand with a bitter relief. Finally, the family saw not the mother who had maintained control, but the one who had caused harm. As the hours passed, Claudia's collapse became more evident. She alternated between pleading, crying, and sitting in silence, unable to maintain any form of composure. The hospital staff observed cautiously, keeping a respectful distance but ready to intervene if her distress escalated further. The doctor spoke again, his tone firm. "Claudia, you must understand the consequences of your actions. Isabella's life was at risk, and your behavior cannot continue unchecked." The words landed like hammer blows, echoing in the room. Claudia's lips quivered, her voice almost inaudible. I just wanted to help." She seemed to believe her own lies for a moment, but then reality crushed them. I finally spoke again, my voice calm yet sharp, carrying the weight of years of suppressed pain. "Helping doesn't look like this. Helping doesn't mean tearing someone's breath away, making them feel smaller, making them invisible. I survived despite you, not because of you. And now, for the first time, you're seeing what your choices have done." I looked around at my relatives, at the hospital staff, at Claudia herself, and felt the strange thrill of empowerment. I wasn't a victim anymore. The person who had whispered doubts and pain into my life for decades had been stripped of her authority, exposed in front of the very people who once followed her lead blindly. By the evening, Claudia sat slumped and defeated, the energy in the room finally softening. My relatives moved to comfort me, but I refused to let the moment pass entirely. "Let this be clear," I said firmly. "No more lies, no more silencing, no more fear. You may have been my mother, but you cannot continue to dictate my life through cruelty. I am not afraid anymore." Her face, pale and trembling, finally betrayed the realization that the reign she had wielded through intimidation and manipulation had ended. For the first time, the woman who had haunted my life for so long appeared entirely powerless. As the room emptied, leaving just the staff, my father, and me, a quiet sense of closure settled over me. I felt tears streaming down my face, but they weren't of sadness. They were relief, release, and reclamation. The years of silence, the hours of suppressed emotion, the fear of speaking up had all led to this moment. Claudia, once untouchable, had been stripped bare by the truth and the courage to speak it, and I, finally, could breathe without the weight of her control pressing down on me. Her actions no longer defined me, and the story of my life was mine to tell. If you've stayed with me through this story, through every twist and betrayal, I want you to remember one thing. The power of truth and courage can break even the most carefully constructed walls. Speaking up, even when it feels impossible, is the first step to reclaiming yourself. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made your heart ache with empathy for what Isabella endured, then please subscribe to the channel and like this video. By doing so, you help share stories of resilience and the unstoppable strength that comes when we refuse to stay silent. Every voice matters, and every story deserves to be heard.